Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. Marcus Thompson unlocked the front door, kicked off his work boots, and walked down the hallway to the kitchen. He had just driven his wife Elena to Austin Bergstrom International Airport, where she was boarding a morning flight to Denver, her bi-weekly business trip to coordinate with the construction company's main office. It was a 3-day routine that had become second nature over the past 6 months, ever since she'd landed the project coordinator position at Henderson Associates Construction. Elena worked directly under Richard Sterling, the company's development director, though Marcus had never warmed up to the man. Something about Sterling's polished demeanor and expensive suits didn't sit right with him. Every time Marcus mentioned his unease, Elena would defend her boss, insisting he was simply professional and sophisticated. Marcus glanced at his watch, 7:30 a.m. Plenty of time before his first service call at Austin Medical Center at 9. As a regional medical equipment technician for MedTech Solutions, he maintained and repaired critical hospital equipment across Central Texas. The job kept him busy, often requiring unexpected overtime when ventilators or imaging machines went down. But he enjoyed the problem-solving aspect and the knowledge that his work directly helped save lives. He poured himself another cup of coffee and settled down to check his email. Marcus wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but he discovered that email was a convenient way to stay in touch with his old trade school buddies. 4 of them had studied medical equipment technology together, and while the others had taken jobs in different cities, Marcus had been fortunate to land a position right here in Austin. Now in his early 30s, Marcus was one of 3 senior technicians and supervised a crew of 5. Despite his leadership role, he still got his hands dirty alongside his team, particularly when dealing with complex diagnostic equipment that required his specialized training. Marcus appreciated his work, even though it sometimes meant emergency calls at odd hours. At least he didn't travel as much as Elena did. She'd only been with Henderson Associates for 6 months, getting the position after completing advanced project management certification that qualified her to move from her previous job as a real estate assistant to this higher-paying role in construction coordination. They had met in community college 8 years ago, each pursuing their respective technical training. They'd been married for 6 years now, and when they first wed, Marcus had just started at MedTech while Elena worked as an administrative assistant at a local real estate office. Together, they'd managed to save enough for a down payment on their current house, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet Austin neighborhood. Being able to buy their own home less than 2 years into their careers was something they both took pride in. After finishing his coffee, Marcus headed to the spare bedroom where their computer sat on a small desk. He hoped Elena had left it on after using it briefly that morning to check her work email. It would save him the boot-up time. As he entered the room, he watched their vacation photo glide slowly across the screen as a screensaver. "Not bad," he said to the empty house, watching their image drift across the monitor. They were lying side by side on beach chairs, surrounded by white sand with the Gulf of Mexico stretching behind them. Both were well-tanned and smiling, wearing modest swimwear from their vacation to South Padre Island 18 months ago. Elena's blonde hair appeared lighter than his sun-bleached brown hair, and when they lay in those chairs, you couldn't tell she was 4 inches shorter than his 6-foot frame. Marcus clicked to clear the screensaver, and the photo disappeared against the black background. That's when he noticed an email from Elena's work account at Henderson Associates displayed on the screen. He wondered why she'd left it open. She'd always been cautious about her corporate email, explaining that construction companies dealt with sensitive bid information and financial data. After a moment's thought, he glanced at the top of the screen and saw the familiar hourglass icon spinning over the browser. He realized what had happened. Their temperamental cable modem had failed again. Every week or so, it would stop communicating with the service provider, and the only way to restore connectivity was to power cycle the device. It was a simple fix that always got them back online. Marcus was reaching for the modem when a phrase in Elena's email caught his attention. The word lingerie appeared in the message preview, and he couldn't understand why such a term would appear in a work email. At that moment, he pulled his hand back from the modem and froze. The email wasn't very long, but its contents cut through him like a knife. Elena, hope I catch you before you leave. Really want you to bring that black set I got you on our last trip, the one with the teal accents. You didn't get to wear it for me last time. My first meeting with the governor's office isn't until 2 p.m., so we should have time for you to model it before I help you out of it this morning. Richard. Marcus read the message 3 times, hoping it would somehow clarify into something innocent. But there was no mistaking the obvious. Elena was having an affair with her boss. If anyone had observed Marcus at that moment, they would have seen him staring at the screen, periodically opening and closing his mouth in shock. Finally, he shook his head and staggered to his feet, pushing his chair so hard it bounced off the wall as he left the room. He knew exactly which lingerie set Richard was referring to. He'd seen the black set with teal accents in Elena's dresser when she'd packed for this trip, and they'd still been there when she'd closed her suitcase. Praying it might still be there, that this could all be some sick joke, Marcus hurried to their bedroom. His hands trembled as he opened Elena's lingerie drawer. The black set with the blue-green trim was gone. He quickly searched through all her drawers, hoping she'd simply moved the items, but found nothing. The realization that his wife had returned to retrieve the missing undergarments after their goodbye hit him like a physical blow. Marcus sat heavily on the edge of their bed, trying to remember what Elena had told him when she'd first brought those items home. He recalled seeing them as she unpacked a shopping bag, taking them from her hands with a grin and saying, "For me? I mean, for you to wear for me." Elena had given him a brief smile, taken them back and said, "Not today. I got them on sale at Victoria's Secret, but they were still expensive." He remembered her putting them in the drawer, and he hadn't thought about them again until now. Marcus sat for several minutes, processing the email and the missing lingerie. He finally decided it couldn't mean what it seemed to mean. There had been no signs, none of the red flags he'd always assumed would be present if a spouse was cheating. Elena remained as loving as ever, eager to be with him when she returned from her business trips. He couldn't remember their last serious disagreement, let alone a real fight, and their intimate moments together had been more frequent than ever. There had to be something he was missing, some explanation for this message. Marcus returned to the computer and manipulated the browser, clicking through screens to get back to a normal cursor. With any luck, Elena's logout command hadn't processed, and he'd be able to examine her email account to see if there were any other messages from Sterling. Mentally crossing his fingers, he reset the modem and waited for the connection lights to reappear. When they did, he carefully examined Elena's email and the folders displayed on the webpage. Scrolling past the message about lingerie, he looked closer and saw that only the inbox folder was currently open. He clicked on it and found 4 additional messages. Opening them one by one, he discovered each dealt with legitimate construction matters that meant nothing to him. Marcus began to fear he might have nothing more to work with in trying to understand what was happening between Elena and her boss, if anything at all. Then, as he scanned through the folder names, he got lucky. Between folders labeled with local company names was another one marked personal. Without hesitation, he clicked on it. The folder was full of message headers, and he could see that roughly half were from Richard Sterling. The folder was sorted by date, and he tentatively opened the first message, afraid of what he might discover. The first message was lengthy, and as he read it, the color drained from his face. He read it a second time, his jaw clenching, and when he finished the second reading, he reached over, turned on the printer, and printed the entire message. While the letter printed, he happened to glance at his watch and realized he'd be late for work if he didn't leave immediately. There was no way he could concentrate on repairing medical equipment in this state, so he grabbed his cell phone and called in sick, which wasn't far from the truth. The printer had finished, so he closed the message he'd read and printed, then moved to the next one. For the next hour, he worked mechanically, selecting and reading messages, printing most of them, and forwarding copies to his personal email account. By the time he'd finished reviewing the messages, his eyes were filled with tears, and he realized his marriage was over. After checking Elena's work email one final time and finding nothing new, he logged out of the corporate site and switched to his personal email account. He created a separate folder and moved all the forwarded messages into it. The last thing he did was change his password. He couldn't remember if Elena knew his old one, but he wanted those emails to remain accessible in case he needed to print additional copies. Shutting down the computer, Marcus took the printed messages and his now cold coffee back to the kitchen. He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, sat down at the kitchen table, and reread the messages one more time. He was surprised by how much they revealed, especially when compared to what he remembered about Elena and Richard's trips to Denver over the past 6 months. Elena had been at her new job for only a week when she'd been informed that she would need to accompany her boss to Denver for meetings with state regulatory offices, client presentations, and coordination with the main office. Their firm worked on government contracts and represented various clients in state-level proceedings. When she'd first told him about it, it had all seemed legitimate and professional. Now Marcus realized that Richard had likely been targeting his wife from the beginning, and that some of the trips probably weren't necessary for business purposes. He could also see from the emails that Elena had soon begun volunteering for additional meetings with Richard. From the correspondence, Marcus deduced that Richard had likely begun the affair on their second trip, though it was possible it had started on the first. The earliest email in Elena's personal folder was Richard's response to a message where she'd thanked him for an expensive designer handbag and a wonderful dinner they'd shared. She also mentioned how much she'd enjoyed everything else, though the specifics weren't detailed in her message. However, Richard's reply did reference their night together, so Marcus could guess exactly what she meant. That first message also explained the designer purse she'd suddenly appeared with a few months ago. When he'd asked how she'd managed to afford it, she'd laughed and called it a $40 knockoff she'd bought at a mall kiosk. The realization that her deception had started so early and how easily she'd lied to him made Marcus feel sick. The correspondence continued regularly, usually before or just after one of their trips. Marcus assumed they communicated in person between trips without needing email, or that the messages she'd kept were the ones more important to her. It was impossible to determine, and honestly, it didn't matter. By the third or fourth email, Marcus had learned how they concealed their meetings from both him and the corporate office. They always stayed at the same hotel and booked adjacent rooms. Marcus hadn't noticed, but every night when he called Elena around 9:45 in room 612 of the Denver Marriott, she was there waiting for his call. After he hung up, she would join Richard in his room for the night. He seemed to have become so predictable that the two of them could manipulate him effortlessly. Their jokes about wishing he'd call earlier so they could get together sooner cut him deeply. He'd never seen this calculating side of Elena before, though it matched his impressions of her boss perfectly. Another message explained the expensive diamond earrings Elena had worn to Henderson Associates' Christmas party. She'd told him they were cubic zirconia, but the correspondence indicated they were genuine, a very expensive Christmas gift from her lover. Also in the folder was a message from Richard thanking Elena for what Marcus had thought was an overly generous gift to her boss, though he now wondered how she'd expressed her gratitude in person. Marcus couldn't believe their only time together was every 2 weeks for 2 nights at the Denver Marriott. He was certain they must meet at other times as well. Finally, on a second reading of one of the more recent emails, he found a clue when Richard mentioned working late at the condo. After some thought, Marcus remembered Elena mentioning that her boss lived on the 10th floor of a luxury condominium overlooking Lady Bird Lake. It now seemed likely that the two of them had been meeting during weekdays at his condominium, either under the pretense of working there or perhaps during extended lunch breaks. If Elena was indeed meeting Richard during the week while in town, she was very careful to eliminate any evidence before returning home. Of course, it might simply be that Marcus fit perfectly into the role of the trusting, oblivious husband. It was nearly noon when Marcus finished rereading all the correspondence and set it aside. He knew he had to decide what to do before Elena returned from Denver. She usually flew back early Friday morning and came straight home from the airport by taxi. Most times, she would call him at work to let him know she'd arrived safely. Ironically, the real danger had been pursuing her while she was out of town. Marcus slowly rose from the kitchen table and retrieved 2 more beers from the refrigerator before heading to the living room, where he stretched out on the couch. He noticed it was already noon and wondered where the time had gone. It felt like nearly 5 hours had passed since he'd entered the house after dropping his wife off, so she could meet her lover at the airport. Marcus realized that the 2 of them must have planned this carefully, because he rarely encountered Richard when he took Elena to the airport. A couple of times he'd spotted the man in the departure lounge, but Richard always completely ignored them both. By 6 o'clock that evening, Marcus was barely conscious. He'd made several trips to the bathroom and kitchen during the day, each time bringing 2 more beers back to the living room. His last attempt, however, was unsuccessful. There was no more beer in the refrigerator. Pausing for a moment, he looked at the row of empty bottles on the coffee table and counted 12 of them. The entire contents of the 2 six-packs he'd bought just the day before. They were supposed to last at least a couple of weeks, and under normal circumstances they would have. Now, however, after consuming the entire dozen while eating nothing, he desperately needed sleep. He managed to make it to their bed before collapsing fully clothed on top of the covers. It was 9:40 p.m. when the ringing phone brought Marcus out of his troubled sleep, a place filled with images of Elena and himself doing things they'd enjoyed since meeting 8 years ago. As he struggled to get to his feet, a glance at his watch told him it was probably Elena calling to ask why he hadn't called her at the Marriott. Everything he'd learned came flooding back with renewed intensity, and he decided to wait until she returned home to confront her. The answering machine had just started to pick up when he grabbed the phone and said, "Hello? Is that you, Marcus?" "Yes, it's me. Why didn't you call? You always call at this time. Is something wrong?" He could hear the concern in her voice, and he wondered why. In his anger, he almost said he was sorry for not letting her get to Richard's bed on time, but he held back. "I'm sorry, Elena. I fell asleep." A flicker of hope passed through his mind that his tone hadn't betrayed his true feelings, but then he wondered why he should even bother with deception. "You've never done this before. What's wrong?" Her voice revealed her displeasure, and he almost decided to tell her he knew everything, but again he decided against it. Instead, he replied as calmly as he could, "I had a couple of beers after work, and I guess they knocked me out." He decided to go on the offensive. "So how was your day? Were you busy this morning? Hopefully Richard isn't working you too hard." Elena hesitated for a moment before replying, "No, I wasn't very busy. Why do you ask?" "You almost never ask about my work." "No reason, just making conversation. Things here are fine. How are things going for you? Are you behaving yourself?" He decided to probe a bit more to gauge her reaction. She quickly replied, "What do you mean? Of course I'm behaving. Why are you asking me that?" He noticed the concern in her voice again. Marcus took his time answering. "I'm just kidding. I know you're always on your best behavior. I trust you completely, and I know my trust is safe with you." She sounded slightly flustered as she replied, "Of course you do. I just wonder why you're saying that. You've never said anything like that before. Just forget it. I didn't mean anything by it." He waited a few seconds before continuing. "I'll probably head to bed soon. The beer is really making me sleepy. Okay, Marcus, I'll let you go. Make sure you get a good night's sleep. Love you." There was no way Marcus could repeat those last 2 words to her, so he said, "Okay, I will. Goodbye, Elena." He hung up and headed to the bathroom to relieve himself of the last remnants of his beer consumption. He felt somewhat better after a few hours of sleep, though he certainly wasn't in any condition to drive. Marcus returned to the kitchen and sat by the phone, waiting exactly 15 minutes before dialing the Denver Marriott. He asked for room 612, and wasn't surprised when the phone went unanswered after a dozen rings before he finally hung up. He wondered if they were implementing some new plan to get him to call her earlier in the future, and also wondered if his failure to call Elena would affect their evening together. In the end, he decided he absolutely didn't care, but then he realized they were probably together while he sat here thinking about it. That realization brought tears to his eyes again, and he stumbled back to bed. The next morning, Marcus was surprised that he didn't feel too terrible despite his overindulgence the previous night. After showering, he felt well enough to go to work, though his mind was on Elena rather than ventilators, patient monitors, and diagnostic equipment. He performed his tasks mechanically, and more than one coworker looked at him questioningly when he didn't seem to understand what he was being told. He was very glad when the workday ended. All his thoughts about Elena and her affair with Richard had solved nothing. On the way home, he bought a couple of burgers and fries, not the kind of food he usually ate. He had no appetite, though, so it didn't matter what he consumed. He washed the food down with 2 beers from the 6-pack he'd grabbed on the way home. He knew he couldn't drink a dozen beers every night, so he purposely left the second 6-pack he'd started to pick up at the checkout counter. At 8 o'clock, he called room 612 at the Denver Marriott, but after 10 rings, there was no answer. The emails had told him that Elena was only in the room from 9:30 to 10 p.m., the usual window for his nightly calls. As an experiment, he called the room every half hour, making his 4th call at 9:25 p.m. None of the calls were answered, and after 10 rings each time, he hung up. The last time he called, at 9:45, Elena answered on the 2nd ring. "Hey, Marcus. Looks like you couldn't sleep tonight either. You're calling right on time. I was just about to get under the covers for a good night's sleep, but I thought I'd better wait for your call." She laughed. "I haven't been sleeping tonight, Elena. I was just watching TV and waiting for the right time to call you. How about you? How did you spend your evening?" He hoped she wasn't alarmed by his question. He knew he'd asked her similar questions many times before. "I was doing the same thing you were, Marcus, just lying here watching TV. In fact, I just turned it off. Before that, I took a long, hot bath." She was very talkative, and it seemed to Marcus that she didn't suspect anything at all. "That's good, Elena. You should be well rested for tomorrow. We'll have to think of something to keep you busy when you get back." She giggled in response. "So you're already making plans? I can't wait." They talked for another 5 minutes without saying anything important. Marcus realized she was telling him one lie after another and finally said, "I need to go. I have a couple more things to do before bed. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, sweetheart. I'm looking forward to tomorrow night. Love you." Marcus hung up without saying another word. He waited again for exactly 15 minutes, checking his watch, before calling room 612 of the Denver Marriott. Again, the phone went unanswered after 10 rings. The next day, Marcus showed up for work at the usual time but left early after lunch. He wanted to be home when Elena arrived from the airport and be ready to confront her. He had no idea exactly how that conversation would unfold, but he knew they wouldn't be spending another night under the same roof. One of them would be finding a new place to live before nightfall, and it didn't matter to him which one. Marcus was home a little after 1 p.m. and knew he'd probably have to wait about an hour before Elena arrived. Considering how awful he'd felt when he'd first discovered what was happening, it surprised him how calmly he waited for her now. It was as if an emptiness had formed in his chest, and he knew tears were close to the surface, but through sheer force of will, he was determined to get through the next couple of hours with some dignity. He spent the time going over their entire relationship in his mind, and all he could remember were the good times. The emails and what he'd discovered seemed to belong to a different universe. They didn't fit with any of his memories of Elena. Marcus was standing at the kitchen sink when he heard her open the front door. A moment later, he heard the wheels of her suitcase rolling down the hallway, approaching him during their final seconds as a married couple. When Elena entered the kitchen, she seemed not to notice him at first. "Marcus, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at work?" There had been surprise on her face when she saw him, but now it was replaced with concern. "I've been waiting for you, Elena." He spoke very calmly, without emotion, and his expression remained neutral. She looked at him with even more concern. "You've been waiting for me? Why?" Marcus didn't answer but instead picked up the stapled bundle of emails and tossed them on the table in front of her. She glanced at him once more, then reached for the papers. Her concerned expression was replaced by curiosity, but that quickly turned to shock. Her face lost all color as she flipped through the first page and scanned the remaining sheets, her gaze lingering on each one for only a fraction of a second. When she reached the last page, she threw the papers back on the table and stood frozen for several moments while color slowly returned to her face. Without looking at him, she said quietly, "Well, now you know." After hesitating a few more moments, she continued, "Where did you get these?" "From your email at work." The modem. It was all Marcus could manage as he had to pause to control his emotions. Elena thought quickly and nodded. "The modem crashed again, and my email stayed on the screen, didn't it?" When Marcus found the ability to speak calmly, he said, "Yes. If it hadn't been for that, I probably never would have found out. You've been very good at keeping this affair secret." Elena said nothing more and seemed to think for a moment. Then she slowly turned around and pulled her cell phone from her purse. A few seconds later, she was speaking into it with her back to Marcus. "Richard? Marcus knows. Doesn't matter how he knows. Does it? Yes, I'll call a cab. I'll meet you there. Bye." She closed the phone and partially turned toward Marcus. "I'm going to leave. I'm sorry you found out this way. I'll be back tomorrow for the rest of my things." She turned to leave again, taking her suitcase with her. Marcus looked at her back in disbelief and exclaimed angrily, "That's it? No explanation at all? You're only sorry that I found out this way?" Elena replied, "What's there to explain? I've been with Richard so much over the past 6 months that being with him completely just felt natural. He's been so good to me. You can't compete, Marcus." "I'm sorry." Tears that had been close to the surface emerged as Marcus said, "Good for you. What about all the money he's spending on you? I know about the purse, the earrings, and other things. Is that what this is about?" He had to stop talking because he was beginning to lose control. Elena hesitated before answering, "The gifts are only part of it, Marcus. Richard does everything first class, and I'm ready to live that way." After she finished speaking, she walked down the hallway to their bedroom and remained there for almost 5 minutes. While Elena was in the bedroom, Marcus tried to pull himself together. He found it very hard to believe this was all about what Richard could give her financially. Marcus knew they were still years away from any kind of affluent lifestyle, but the Elena he thought he knew had never complained. Was he really that wrong about her? When she returned from the bedroom, Elena had a packed garment bag in her hands. She must have called a cab from the bedroom because just as she reached the kitchen, 2 short car horn honks sounded outside. Without further conversation, Elena gathered her suitcase and walked out the front door. Marcus silently followed her, watching as the cab driver hurried down the sidewalk to collect her luggage. She got into the cab and waited for the driver to load her bags before casting a quick glance at Marcus through the window. Marcus wasn't certain, but he thought she might have been crying. When Marcus returned to the kitchen, he asked aloud, "What the hell just happened here?" There was no one to answer, so he sat down at the kitchen table and tried to process the situation with his once loving wife. The next day, Saturday, Marcus was still in shock and couldn't believe that Elena had walked away from their marriage, their home, and him so easily. That afternoon, she called to say she was coming to collect the rest of her belongings. When Elena arrived, her father was with her, bringing their van and several empty boxes. While the two of them carried boxes into the bedroom, Marcus made his way to the living room and sat quietly on the couch. A few minutes later, Marcus was joined by Elena's father, William Hartwell. They sat in silence for several minutes before Marcus spoke. "Did she tell you what's going on?" Marcus asked. Her father looked somewhat embarrassed but finally replied, I'm sorry, Marcus. She seems to have made up her mind already. Her mother and I don't understand why she'd want to leave you for her boss. We've never met the man, but he must be really something to be a better choice than you. Marcus was still confused. I guess it's just about what he can give her. That's all she told me, and it doesn't make sense. He looked at his father-in-law and continued, I know it sounds harsh, but that's really all I can say. She didn't tell me she loved him or that she'd stopped loving me. William was quiet for a moment but finally asked, Does it really matter? Marcus thought before answering, No, I guess not. She's been sleeping with him regularly for months now. I can't forgive that, even if it seemed like she wanted to try. The two men continued to sit in silence until Elena emerged and said, I have everything I want to keep. Anything else you find, you can do whatever you want with. Give it away or throw it out. There were tears in her eyes as she took a quick look around the living room, then walked outside with one of the boxes. Her father followed with another and made several more trips to collect the remaining items. After they left, Marcus returned to their bedroom and noticed there were still a few of Elena's belongings in the closet she'd been using. He opened the drawers of her dresser and saw there were some items remaining there as well. The lingerie drawer still contained several sets he remembered giving her for birthdays and Valentine's Day. Marcus picked up one of the bras he'd given her and threw it back in the drawer with disgust. She could at least have taken them and thrown them away herself. Felt like she wanted to leave reminders of herself behind. He went to the kitchen and grabbed a couple of garbage bags. After a few minutes, he'd folded the remaining clothes into them and tied them up for donation to charity. Another bag filled with makeup and toiletries she'd left in the bedroom and bathroom went straight into the trash. An hour later, there was no obvious sign left in either room that Elena had ever lived there. Marcus knew he'd probably find other items later, but for now, he was satisfied that he'd removed the most obvious traces of her presence. Marcus spent the rest of the day lying on the bed they'd once shared, thinking about what he should have done differently and considering various scenarios for revenge. Eventually, he realized that although he was angry, he wasn't a violent or vengeful person. He would be better off devoting his energy to simply forgetting about her, as difficult as that might prove to be. The weekend passed quickly, though Marcus couldn't remember much about it. He'd bought a couple more six-packs, and now they all sat empty in the recycling bin. He knew that drinking himself into oblivion wasn't his usual style, but it was the only way he could get through the weekend. Trying to figure out why Elena had done what she did was driving him crazy, and the only solution was to force himself to stop asking the question. By Monday morning, Marcus felt somewhat better, coming to terms with the facts of what had happened, whether or not he could explain them. Neither Monday nor Tuesday at work were particularly difficult. On Tuesday, he called Henderson Associates to get a forwarding address for Elena's mail. Instead of being transferred to her, the receptionist returned a few minutes later and informed him that Elena would email him whatever information he needed. Later that evening, when Marcus checked his email, there was one message from Elena's work account containing only a forwarding address, one he recognized as Richard's luxury condominium address. Wednesday started as a normal workday for Marcus until mid-morning, when he was called to the office for a phone call. It was his bank, demanding that he address a mortgage payment that had just been returned for insufficient funds. After several minutes of heated discussion with the bank's loan officer, Marcus discovered that both of the checking accounts he and Elena had maintained now had zero balances. A few more questions revealed that nearly $20,000 had been transferred out of those accounts on Monday. Marcus found himself in a financial crisis. Although he could barely afford it, he took time off to try to sort out the mess. The first thing he did was drive straight to Henderson Associates. He was furious with Elena and intended to demand that half the money be returned to their accounts. In his opinion, she had stolen nearly $10,000 from him. Marcus was agitated when he entered the construction office. He bypassed the receptionist and headed straight for Elena's desk. She didn't see him coming and looked up, startled, when he started speaking loudly to her from 10 feet away. "What the hell are you doing? Emptying both our bank accounts. I want half that money back right now." Richard Sterling immediately stepped out of his office to see what was happening. As soon as Marcus saw him, he changed direction toward the well-dressed executive. Marcus managed to get within 2 feet of him, but at that moment, Richard's office door slammed shut. Marcus heard the deadbolt engage as he tried the handle. Obviously, talking to Richard wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Marcus quickly turned back to Elena, just in time to prevent her from leaving her desk. She quickly sat back down, her face and neck flushed with embarrassment. "Where's my money, Elena? What do you think you're doing? Is this all so much about money that you're willing to take what doesn't belong to you?" Marcus was practically shouting by now, and people throughout the office were listening and beginning to gather nearby, eager to see what would unfold. Elena finally found her voice. "I'm taking the money, and you can have the car, the house, and the furniture." She rummaged through a pile of envelopes and packages on her desk and pulled out an envelope, which she thrust into his hand. "Here's everything. If you want to argue about it, get a lawyer. I was really hoping you'd receive this before you discovered the money was missing. I think you'll find it's quite fair." Before Marcus could open the envelope, 2 security guards approached him, both with tasers visible on their belts. One of them said, "You need to leave right now. If you don't leave immediately, you'll be arrested. We're authorized to use these weapons, so don't test us." Marcus realized that defying them wouldn't lead to anything productive. As he turned to leave, he said, "You've become someone I don't even recognize, Elena. I don't understand how you could have changed so much. The Elena I remember wouldn't have acted like this." He cast another glance toward Richard's locked office and shouted, "Stay in your office, Sterling, you coward." Marcus noticed that several of Elena's co-workers chuckled at his remark, clearly enjoying the executive's timid reaction to Marcus's visit. Walking back to his truck, Marcus opened the envelope. He soon realized that Elena had provided Richard with all the details of their assets and debts, and Richard had compiled them into a spreadsheet that seemed to show that if she took the cash while Marcus kept the car, house, and furniture, everything would be divided equally between them. They had very few debts other than the mortgage and some outstanding credit card balances. The spreadsheet indicated that each would be responsible for their own credit card debt, so at least they wouldn't have to worry about that complication. As Marcus examined the numbers more closely, he realized it all depended on whether he would accept his share as equity in an overvalued house plus furnishings that were hardly worth what they'd both claimed. He realized that if he tried to get his fair share of the $20,000 in cash, it would never happen. Their figures didn't include realtor fees and legal costs associated with selling the house. Everything looked reasonable on paper, and that was exactly what Marcus expected from Richard Sterling. Shoving the papers back into the envelope, Marcus drove to his bank, where he was able to arrange a line of credit that would cover his outstanding mortgage payment and anything else that might arise before his next paycheck was deposited. He hoped he could handle the mortgage, the new loan, and all household expenses until he could get things organized. He'd always counted on their savings to help manage income fluctuations or unexpected expenses. Marcus knew it would take at least a couple of months to regain financial stability. The next 2 weeks passed in an emotional haze for Marcus. The day after his confrontation at Henderson Associates, he received an official letter warning him to stay away from Elena and Richard Sterling, or harassment charges would be filed against him, along with a restraining order requiring him to maintain at least 100 yards distance from them. This infuriated Marcus so much that he almost decided to call their bluff, but eventually realized it would probably work against him. A week later, his anger returned when he received notice that Elena had filed for divorce, using the settlement terms they'd outlined in the spreadsheet they'd sent him. The $200 consultation fee and a couple more hours of lost wages led to another well-dressed attorney telling Marcus that while the settlement might not be entirely fair, he would spend more than it was worth to fight it. When Marcus wasn't being harassed with letters and notices from Elena and Richard, his life began to improve. 3 weeks after Elena left, he realized he still needed to work on erasing her memory from their home. Every time he entered the bedroom, He saw images of her sitting at the vanity she'd always used or lying on the bed reading, one of her favorite leisure activities. Marcus began making changes around the house to create a new atmosphere. First, he removed the vanity and stored it in the basement. He found he could rearrange the bedroom furniture to give the room a completely different look from what he and Elena had established. In the bathroom, he removed some decorative items she'd hung on the walls, giving that space a fresh appearance as well. When he was finished, Marcus felt better and was able to think of the house as truly his own. While making these changes, he realized there were more obvious reminders of Elena that he'd need to address. Photographs of her or the two of them that hung on several walls and sat on end tables and the mantelpiece in the living room. One evening, Marcus decided to remove all these images and reminders. He went through the house, taking pictures out of their frames and placing them in a box he'd found in the basement. Once he'd finished that task, he moved on to their collection of photo albums stored in a bookcase in the living room. The first album he picked up contained almost nothing but pictures of the two of them. After removing a few that showed him alone or with friends he still valued, he put the book with the remaining photos in the box. The next album documented their wedding, and the only pictures he kept were of himself with his parents. They had passed away after the wedding, and those were the last photos he had of them. The rest of the book went into the box. Marcus continued flipping through the remaining albums, keeping only a few pictures before adding each book to the box. The last album he removed from the shelf contained mostly photos he'd brought into their marriage, many from his childhood and school years. There were also a few pictures of Elena that he removed and added to the collection in the box. Leafing through this book of memories from his younger years, Marcus came across one that made him pause. It was a photograph of him with Samantha Brooks, his close friend throughout most of high school. He wondered what she was doing now and what had become of her after she'd left for college. They'd broken up when she moved away, and Marcus had ended up attending technical school, while Samantha went to university. The entire photo book was placed neatly back on the shelf, and the small stack of pictures he'd saved from other albums was placed on top to be sorted later. For the moment, Marcus thought he'd accomplished enough and would return to organizing photos another day. He'd managed to eliminate the most obvious reminders of Elena, though that didn't prevent him from thinking about her frequently during the day, and especially at night as he lay in what had been their marital bed. Before going to sleep, Marcus pulled out the local phone directory and searched through the listings for Brooks. Samantha wasn't listed, which didn't surprise him, but neither was her widowed mother, Dorothy Brooks. Marcus still remembered their address, but it wasn't listed under any Brooks names. There were only a few entries for Brooks, and none related to his memories of Samantha. Having satisfied his curiosity, Marcus set the book aside and stopped thinking about the only other woman who had ever meant anything to him. About 6 weeks after Elena's hasty departure from his life, Marcus was interrupted by a knock at the front door, pulling him away from his late-night television viewing sessions. Night after night, he sat watching programs that held absolutely no meaning for him other than as a way to fill the hours between dinner and bedtime. When Marcus opened the door, he was surprised to see Elena's brother, David Hartwell. "Hello, David. Come on in. I wasn't expecting to see you." Marcus stepped back to let Elena's older brother into the house. Once inside, David turned, patted his brother-in-law on the shoulder and said, "What's up, Marcus? I tried calling, but the message said your number was no longer in service." "Oh yes, I gave up the landline and now only use my cell phone. I don't see the need for the extra expense." Marcus led David into the living room, where they sat in separate armchairs. "Can I get you a beer?" "Sure, Marcus. That sounds good." Marcus stepped out briefly and returned with 2 open bottles, handing one to his longtime friend. "I don't suppose you'll want a glass with that?" "No, I'm fine." Both men sipped from their bottles, after which Marcus asked, "So what brings you here?" "I wasn't sure I'd see anyone from the family again after Elena left." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Actually, that's why I'm here. You know she's been Jessica's best friend for years, and 2 days ago Elena stopped by to visit. I told Elena what I thought about her cheating on you with her boss. Afterward, Elena and Jessica went into the kitchen to talk privately. I went out to the garage because I was too angry with her to stay inside. Thanks for the support, David, but I don't want to come between you and your sister. What's done is done, and I'm trying to move forward with my life. Well, she's my little sister, and I know that eventually this will affect my relationship with her, but right now I don't really care. I know my parents aren't thrilled either, but they'll stand by her no matter what. Marcus glanced down at his beer. Family first. David continued. Anyway, I left the kitchen door slightly open when I went to the garage. Although I wasn't interested in talking to her, I decided I wanted to hear what Elena had to say for herself. I went and sat by the kitchen door and just listened. Marcus was obviously interested in what David had heard, so he leaned forward. Did she have anything interesting to say? I'm still trying to figure out what she found in this guy besides his money. I think you hit the nail on the head. I can't quote them word for word, but I can give you the essence of their conversation. When you caught her with those emails, she quickly made the decision to leave you for her boss. She realized you'd never forgive her, so she chose what she saw as her best option. Wasn't she already committed to him? Marcus asked, looking puzzled. Apparently not. From what I heard, she told Jessica that while the gifts and lifestyle with Richard are appealing, she said you're far superior to him in intimate matters. She indicated she would have ended things with him very soon, maybe even that week, if you hadn't discovered her emails. Would have, could have, should have, it doesn't matter now. Marcus took a long drink from his bottle and leaned back in his chair. She understands it's over. I just thought you might be interested to know she's really regretting this whole situation right now. That hasn't stopped her from proceeding full speed with the divorce, of course. I got the new papers from the courthouse today. I guess Richard has connections with a judge who's expediting the process for her. I never heard anything about it from her, but I've heard both of them use the term starter husband. It sounds like they discussed it before, and when she first began seeing him, she thought he'd be a step up. The other thing is that Jessica obviously knew about all this from the beginning. I'm so upset with Jessica that I hesitate to bring it up with her. I'm afraid of what I might say. So she thinks of me as her starter husband. How wonderful. Marcus paused to control his anger before continuing. I don't want you fighting with Jessica over me, David. It wasn't just Elena who thought that way. From the tone of their conversation, it sounds like Jessica may have shared similar thoughts. I'm going to talk to her about all this soon as I feel I can discuss it without losing my temper. My wife has a lot to answer for. The conversation continued for another half hour, after which David got up to leave. He added a few more minor details from the overheard conversation, but nothing significant. Marcus was still thinking about being called a starter husband when he finally fell asleep a couple of hours later. The next day after work, Marcus stopped at one of the larger grocery stores on his way home. He decided it was time to start eating more healthily, something better than the fast food he'd been consuming for the past 6 weeks. Marcus had just gotten in the checkout line when the cashier asked, "Aren't you Marcus Thompson?" Marcus looked up and immediately recognized her as a former classmate. "Hi, Ashley. I didn't realize you worked here. It's been a while." They continued their pleasant conversation while Ashley scanned his groceries. After paying, Marcus asked, "Ashley, you were close with Samantha Brooks in high school. Have you heard anything about what happened to her or her mother?" Ashley thought for a moment before answering. "I remember hearing that she got married, but that was years ago. Her mother still lives in the same house, although she remarried a few years back. I haven't kept in touch. Do you know Mrs. Brooks' new last name?" Ashley thought a moment longer. "Mitchell, I think. Maybe Mitchell or Morrison." After agreeing to meet sometime for coffee, the old friends said their goodbyes. Returning home, Marcus was in a better mood than he'd experienced in weeks. Meeting an old friend had brought back many pleasant memories, and he was grateful for any opportunity to take his mind off thoughts of his soon-to-be ex-wife. After preparing a healthy dinner, Marcus went for a short jog for the first time in weeks, the start of what he decided would be a new nightly routine of proper nutrition followed by regular exercise. Shortly after returning from his run, Marcus decided to look up Samantha's mother's phone number. He soon found it in the phone directory under the name Mitchell. Realizing time was important, he dialed the number. Soon Marcus was speaking with Dorothy Mitchell and got straight to the point. "I was hoping to get Samantha's contact information. I thought I might call her just to say hello. I was just on my way out to see her. Her name is Samantha Brooks now. She kept her married name after she was widowed. You don't need to write. You can just call her." She provided the phone number and added that Samantha's husband, Michael, had been killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago, leaving her with a young daughter. Since Dorothy was in a hurry to leave, they said a quick goodbye. After their conversation, Marcus found Samantha Brooks in the phone directory and noticed her address was in an area known as a lower-income neighborhood. He was quite surprised by this. Military survivor benefits weren't generous, but he wouldn't have expected her to be living in that particular area. Marcus decided that sometime soon he would definitely call her. Over the next few days, Marcus found that his new healthy lifestyle was affecting his outlook on life, and he was much more positive at work. He began to believe that life without Elena was not only possible but potentially better. Just as he was beginning to feel optimistic, a new letter from Elena disrupted his progress. It was a very brief note consisting of just one line. "I never thought of you as a starter husband." It was obvious that David and Jessica had discussed what David had overheard when he'd visited Marcus a few days ago. Jessica had apparently shared the information David had passed along to Marcus. That message brought back everything Marcus had been trying to forget. After considering her note for a few minutes, he sent a reply. "Actions speak louder than words." She never responded to that message. Almost exactly 3 months after Elena had left their home for Richard, Marcus received the final divorce papers. Richard's apparent ability to expedite those documents through the system surprised him. Returning from his usual evening run, Marcus celebrated his newly single status with a single glass of cold beer. After finishing it, he went to his computer and sent Elena a text. "You got what you wanted." It was the last communication between them, and she never responded. Later that evening, after reviewing and filing the divorce decree, Marcus decided it was time to call Samantha Brooks and reconnect with her. He'd thought about calling her several times over the past few weeks since getting her number, but hadn't felt ready to take that step. Since he was now divorced and she was a widow, Marcus thought perhaps they could share a dinner or a few drinks one evening to reminisce about old times. With that thought in mind, he dialed her number. When she answered, Marcus had just enough time to introduce himself when she said, "Marcus, I'm so glad you called. My mom told me you'd contacted her, and I was beginning to think you'd decided not to call." The two old friends spent the next hour catching up on the highlights of their lives since graduation. Marcus learned that Samantha had married Michael Brooks in her final year of college. He'd been in the National Guard and was deployed to Afghanistan. 3 months after arriving there, she received word that an improvised explosive device had killed him and 2 other soldiers during a convoy patrol, leaving her a widow with a 4-year-old daughter, Emma. The 2 of them lived on the survivor benefits she received from the military, but as soon as Emma was old enough for school, Samantha planned to return to work in her field as a physical therapist. She explained that she'd been working part-time doing home health visits, but it was difficult to manage with Emma's schedule. For his part, Marcus told Samantha about his new single status and some of the details of how and why he'd become newly divorced. Eventually, it was time to say goodbye, as Samantha needed to put Emma to bed. Marcus decided this would be a good time to see if Samantha would be interested in going out with him. "So, Samantha, what do you think about getting together for dinner or drinks one evening?" Samantha hesitated before answering, "I'm sorry, Marcus, but I don't think I'm ready for that yet. Right now, I'm more focused on Emma than anything else. Maybe some other time. Marcus was disappointed. He'd thought they might reconnect after all these years. It's okay, Samantha. I hope I didn't upset you by asking. Goodbye, and good luck, Marcus. He found her response somewhat concerning, so he quickly hung up. The fact that he was officially divorced and then rejected by his old girlfriend led Marcus back to the refrigerator for another beer. After finishing it, he went straight to bed. It had been an emotionally challenging day. The next 2 months passed quickly for Marcus. He'd grown accustomed to his new routine and knew that eventually, he'd have to decide what to do with the rest of his life. He knew there was no point in pursuing a new relationship, so he put that aspect of his life on hold, wanting to wait until Elena was completely relegated to his past. Marcus still found it difficult to go more than a few hours without thinking about her, although he could tell that those recurring memories were becoming less disturbing as time passed. Marcus had canceled newspaper delivery months ago, when he'd given up his landline and premium cable channels in an effort to reduce expenses. Now he preferred to read newspapers left in the break room by coworkers. Occasionally, he listened to local news on the radio, but not regularly. It was in this relatively uninformed state that he went to work one morning. During his coffee break, he was having a casual conversation with another technician when the man tossed a newspaper in front of him and said, "You'd better read this, Marcus." Marcus picked up the paper and read the headline, "One dead, one critical in highway crash." The accompanying article described a fatal accident the night before on Highway 183 leading from the Austin Country Club. The driver had lost control of the car, which went off the road and rolled several times. The driver, identified as Richard Sterling, was ejected from the vehicle and died at the scene. The passenger, Elena Hartwell, suffered serious injuries and was in intensive care at Austin Medical Center. The police report indicated that alcohol may have been a factor in the accident. After reading the article twice, Marcus tossed the paper back to the man who'd given it to him and said, "Can't say I'm sorry to see him dead. I hope Elena pulls through, but other than that, I think I care about her about as much as I should, which isn't much." The man looked at him carefully. "Are you sure, Marcus? I know her leaving hit you pretty hard. You were pretty much useless around here for a while," he said, laughing. "Yeah, I'm sure. Reading that article proved it to me. Now I have only normal human compassion for her, not the slightest desire to rush to her bedside." Reading that article was a turning point for Marcus. He could now admit to himself that he'd truly gotten over Elena and felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. As much as he felt sorry for her and her parents, he was pleased that he'd reached the point where he realized he could move forward with his life. Over the next few days, local news sources confirmed that Richard Sterling had been intoxicated when he drove off the road. In the same reports, Elena remained unconscious and in critical condition. Marcus's reaction to this news was to invite one of the office staff out for dinner, which they both enjoyed. He was very pleased to find himself enjoying a woman's company again. They made no plans for future dates, but it was enough for Marcus to know he was completely out of the emotional rut he'd been in for so long. About 2 weeks after the accident, well after it was no longer front-page news, Marcus answered a late evening knock at his door and found David Hartwell there. He invited him in, and soon both men were sitting in the kitchen, each with a cold beer. "What brings you here, David? It's been a while." "Nothing much, Marcus. I was in the neighborhood, as they say. I was sorry to hear about the accident Elena was in. I imagine it's been very hard on your family. There hasn't been anything in the papers lately. Is she doing any better?" David took a long drink before answering, "Yes, it's been terribly hard on Mom and Dad. She had a pretty serious head injury and was unconscious for several days. Thank goodness she was wearing her seatbelt. That idiot she was with wasn't buckled in, and he paid for it. Looks like Elena paid a steep price for his decision to drink and drive. Someone should sue his estate for her injuries." David sighed. "Yeah, Dad and I have talked about that. Elena is still in a medically induced coma. She had to have major brain surgery because of swelling from the head trauma. Once the swelling goes down completely, they'll reduce the medication and see if she regains consciousness. They don't make any guarantees. I didn't realize she was in such bad shape. The news always just said she was in the ICU. Tell your parents I said hello when you see them. David looked at Marcus. I will. Thanks for your concern. They were actually wondering why you didn't visit the hospital. I tried to explain that you have your own life now, and Elena is no longer part of it. Marcus laughed softly. Yeah, I think I've been able to move on with my life. I actually went on my first date in years the day after I read about the accident. While I'm sorry she was hurt so badly, I'm not going to let it affect my life. A year ago, I would have lost my mind over this situation, but Elena freed me from that. They continued talking about sports and work and didn't return to the subject of Elena until the very end of David's visit. As he was about to leave, David said, By the way, Marcus, I think Jessica and I have worked through that whole issue I mentioned last time. She saw the mess Elena made before the accident and decided she'd rather be happy with what she has. I guess it's one of those grass is always greener situations. I'm glad to hear that, David. It was probably Elena who confused Jessica. Somewhere in Elena's mind, she forgot her obligations to me and our marriage. It could have been much worse. We could have had children. They shook hands and David left for home. Another 6 weeks passed quickly for Marcus. He heard nothing more about Elena's condition and assumed her recovery was progressing well. Marcus had become more involved in dating and was going out about once a week during this period. He went out a couple of times with Janet, the receptionist from work, and spent a few evenings at her apartment. Neither of them expected their relationship to develop into anything serious, but they both enjoyed their time together. The nights at her place had helped him overcome his last concerns about getting back into dating. It was a Thursday evening, and Marcus had just returned from his regular run when he heard his doorbell ring. Opening the door, he was very surprised to see his former father-in-law on his doorstep. Come in, William. What brings you here unexpectedly? The older man paused at the threshold. I can't stay right now. I'm on my way to the hospital. I'd like to ask you to come to the hospital and see Elena with her mother and me. She regained consciousness this week, and we were hoping you could meet us there tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Marcus looked at him curiously. I suppose I can, but what's the urgency? Why do you need me to visit her? Our marriage has been over for months. William sighed with relief. We'd just appreciate you meeting us there if you can. We'll explain everything then. Right now, I'm in a real hurry. I'll see you tomorrow. The older man quickly turned and hurried back to his car, leaving Marcus standing at his front door in confusion. The next day, Marcus rearranged his schedule so he could take a late lunch and start the weekend early by making the agreed-upon trip to the hospital. He left work at 1 p.m. and, instead of stopping for lunch, snacked on an apple from his bag as he drove. Marcus arrived at the hospital early but decided to go up to Elena's room anyway. Maybe he could get this over with faster than planned. It was already 2:30 when he stepped off the elevator on Elena's floor. He'd been given the room number at the front desk and saw immediately that it was directly across from the nurse's station. Marcus hadn't noticed it affecting him before, but now it was obvious he was actually somewhat nervous. He hadn't seen Elena since his angry visit to her office at Henderson Associates and hadn't even exchanged emails with her in months. He was certain this encounter could be emotionally challenging. Taking a deep breath, Marcus quietly stepped through the open door of her private room and stopped, staring at the scene before him. Elena was clearly awake, her shoulder-length blonde hair now only about 2 inches long, obviously shaved weeks ago for surgery. At least one scar was visible on the right side of her head, not yet completely hidden by the growing hair. To her right was an 4-stand with tubing leading to her arm. To her left was equipment displaying her heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen levels. A bundle of wires ran from the machines to sensors attached to her body. To avoid disturbing her, Marcus decided to wait for her parents to arrive. He was actually surprised to see her again. She remained as beautiful as ever. Her face and neck showed no signs of the accident, nor did her hands and arms. Only the scar on her head indicated the terrible crash she'd survived. Marcus had been watching her for about 2 minutes when her eyes slowly opened and focused on him. As if a switch had been flipped, her face suddenly brightened, and she said, "Marcus, you're here. Where have you been? I've missed you so much these past few days. No one could tell me where you were." Marcus was completely taken aback by her reaction and questions. "Where do you think I've been?" "I've been home and at work." Elena reacted with a confused expression. "Why weren't you here when I woke up? Why would you go to work or stay home when I was here?" His confusion matched hers, and he was becoming irritated by her questions. He quickly replied, "Why would I wait here for you? We're divorced. You left me for your lover. Why the hell should I visit you? I'm only here because your parents asked me to come." Elena's reaction completely surprised and alarmed Marcus. She immediately cried out and tried to move toward him. She was obviously extremely agitated and kept saying, "No, no, no. What are you saying?" She began waving her arms around, trying to free herself from the monitoring equipment and tubing. After a few seconds, she pulled the 4 from her right arm. The alarm on the infusion pump began a steady beep, soon joined by the loud, shrill beeping of the heart monitoring equipment when Elena managed to disconnect the sensor cables. A few seconds after the alarm sounded, 2 nurses rushed in from the hallway. The first looked at Marcus and asked, "What did you do to her?" She then hurried past him to Elena, grabbed her flailing arms, and forced her back onto the bed. She paid no attention when Marcus answered, "I didn't do anything. I was standing by the door the whole time." Elena mumbled something incoherently, trying to break free from the nurse's firm grip. The second nurse quickly assessed the situation and said, "I'll get restraints and call the doctor for sedation orders." She turned and quickly left the room. Marcus slowly walked out of the hospital room, turning around and shaking his head as he headed for the elevator. "I think she's lost her mind," he said to no one in particular. As Marcus reached the elevator, the doors opened, and Elena's parents stepped out. Before they could say a word to him, screams and shouting came from Elena's room, and their attention was caught by a nurse rushing into the room with supplies and a syringe. "What happened?" Elena's mother looked at Marcus fearfully. "You didn't talk to her, did you?" When he answered affirmatively, she said, "Oh God, no," and the 2 of them rushed past him into her room. Marcus was completely confused by the strange situation unfolding around him. After watching and listening for a few seconds, he reached out and pressed the elevator down button. As he entered the elevator and the doors began to close, he saw Elena's father leave the room, obviously looking for him. Marcus managed to raise his hand in a farewell gesture before the doors closed completely. Satisfied that he'd fulfilled William Hartwell's request but pleased he could start his weekend even earlier than expected, Marcus drove straight home from the hospital. On the way, he reviewed the strange scenes that had taken place in Elena's room. None of it made sense to him, and he decided to forget about it. He tried to honor William's request, but Elena's reaction to his visit had quickly ended his efforts. He was certain she had psychological problems from the accident that he could happily leave to her parents and doctors. After showering and changing clothes, Marcus found himself thinking about something that had been on his mind from time to time over the past few weeks. He decided to call Samantha Brooks one more time, hoping she might reconsider her earlier refusal to join him for dinner. If she refused again, Marcus decided he would call Janet from the office and invite her over for the evening. He felt he needed female company to take his mind off Elena and her strange behavior. Marcus almost hung up when the phone started ringing, not knowing if he wanted to face another rejection from Samantha. But the opportunity disappeared when Samantha answered the phone. "Hi, Samantha. This is Marcus Thompson calling. I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." "Marcus, no, I'm not busy at all. I'm so glad you called again. I've tried several times to reach you, but the number in the directory doesn't work anymore. I was afraid you'd moved or something. I wanted to apologize for being so abrupt with you the last time you asked me out. I gave up the landline and only use my cell phone now. You don't need to apologize, Samantha. I'm old enough to handle rejection, he said with a laugh. Actually, I called to see if you'd changed your mind and would like to have dinner with me tonight or tomorrow night. He waited patiently to see what excuse she might offer this time. Samantha hesitated before replying. I have plans with my mom and stepdad tomorrow. It's their anniversary. After another pause, she continued, I'm afraid tonight won't work either because I couldn't find a babysitter for Emma on such short notice. She was genuinely disappointed that she had to turn him down again. There's a simple solution. We can just take Emma with us. You've told me so much about her. I'd really like to meet her. After that, Marcus decided that if she made any more excuses, it would be clear she wasn't interested in seeing him. Samantha laughed. I doubt you've ever gone out to dinner with a 4-year-old. Have you? Taking a child along puts serious restrictions on where you can go. Well, maybe we should pick a place where she'd be comfortable. I just know I'd like to take you out, and a family restaurant seems like a great option. Marcus waited patiently for her answer, realizing it was now or never. Deep down, he really wanted her to say yes. He believed the two of them had unfinished business. Their breakup after high school had been due to the realities of their different educational paths, not any fundamental incompatibility. If you're serious, there's this restaurant Emma really loves. The food and atmosphere are very nice, even though it's considered a family place. There's a great dessert bar that Emma absolutely loves. Then it's settled. I'll pick you up at 5 o'clock. You'll have to tell me where it is. Marcus was very pleased, and his pleasure was evident in his tone. Samantha was excited too as she replied, You don't mind including Emma? Are you sure about that? Marcus laughed. Absolutely. If she's anything like her mother, I'm sure she'll be delightful to spend time with. I've always found you to be one of the most considerate and well-mannered people I've ever known. They continued chatting until Samantha said it was time to get both of them ready. Marcus was thrilled by the conversation, happier than he'd been in a very long time. He sincerely hoped their evening would be everything he'd envisioned. Later that night, as Marcus lay in bed waiting for sleep, he was reviewing the details of his date with Samantha and Emma. He lay there smiling, pleased with how well it had gone. Now he was looking forward to Sunday morning. He'd agreed to accompany them both to church. Something Samantha had mentioned was important to her family since Michael's death. Marcus remembered the beginning of their evening as he'd pulled up to the apartment complex where Samantha lived. He'd been amazed by the beautiful woman who met him at the door, changed in so many subtle ways from what he remembered. Their last meeting had been over 10 years ago. Her dark hair was now cut short, which suited her well. For some reason, she seemed taller, but Marcus was sure that was just a trick of memory. She developed curves in all the right places, but the beautiful smile and dark eyes he remembered were still there. The first time he saw her, it took his breath away. Emma looked like a miniature version of her mother, with the same dark hair and eyes. Samantha said she had her father's nose and chin, though Marcus thought even in those features she resembled her mother more. Emma shook his hand politely when they were introduced, and Marcus noticed she was studying him closely, so closely that he wondered if the child might object to him showing interest in her mother. He'd heard of cases where incompatibility with children had doomed relationships between their parents and potential partners. His concerns were quickly dispelled when Emma agreed to hold his hand as they walked from Samantha's car to the restaurant. They used her car to avoid having to transfer the car seat, and Marcus drove while Samantha navigated and Emma provided commentary from her seat in the back. By the time they reached their destination, Marcus had grown quite fond of the chatty little girl. Their dinner went very well, and they found plenty to talk about. Emma often interrupted the conversation, usually asking, "What's that mean?" when either of them used a word she didn't understand. Marcus found this habit quite amusing, while Samantha seemed slightly embarrassed by the frequent interruptions. When the main course was finished, Marcus convinced Emma to go with him to the dessert counter, where the two of them selected and prepared the desserts they each wanted. Samantha asked for soft-serve ice cream with chocolate sauce, and Marcus got Emma to prepare her mother's order while he supervised. Marcus's choice was simple, a slice of apple pie with ice cream, and again Emma did the preparation while he encouraged her. Her own dessert selection took the longest, as she couldn't decide which of 3 toppings to put on her ice cream. Marcus made himself a friend for life when he suggested she get all 3. The trip to Samantha's apartment was a continuation of the good times they'd enjoyed at the restaurant. Marcus walked them to the door, but any thoughts he had of hugging or kissing Samantha goodbye were interrupted when Emma took her mother's hand and pulled until she agreed to take the girl to her room, bathe her, and read her a story before bedtime. It was past noon on Sunday when Samantha stopped in front of Marcus's house to drop him off after church and the brunch they'd shared at a local diner. Emma was busy talking about animals when Marcus noticed there were people waiting for him at his front door. "I think someone's at your front door," Samantha observed. Marcus looked and said, "Those are my former in-laws. I wonder what they want. I guess I'd better go see." Emma quickly got his attention by saying, "Don't forget you're taking me to the zoo." She seemed worried that his unexpected visitors would somehow interfere with their afternoon plans. "I won't forget, Emma. I'll come back for you after I change clothes, and then I'll take you to the zoo. I promise." He smiled at the girl and her mother before getting out of the car. Marcus stood and waved goodbye as they drove away, then turned to his visitors. "What brings you here on such a beautiful Sunday afternoon?" Elena's mother, Patricia, was the first to speak. "We need to talk to you. It's very important." You could tell from her expression that she was upset. "Sure. I'm leaving around 2 o'clock, but we can go inside and have some coffee and talk if you'd like." They went into the house and settled in the kitchen, where Marcus started making coffee while they sat at the table. Patricia began speaking immediately. "Marcus, Elena has been in a terrible state ever since you visited her. She's had to be sedated constantly. As soon as the medication wears off and she regains consciousness, she becomes hysterical. What's causing it, and what does it have to do with me? When we asked you to meet us on Friday, we wanted you to speak with her neurologist first. We wanted him to explain Elena's condition to you. I'm sorry I didn't know that, but what difference would it have made? I barely told her anything anyway." Patricia's voice trembled as her husband took her hand. She continued, "The problem is that you told her about her affair and the divorce. We were hoping to avoid that until she became stronger." Marcus was puzzled and quickly asked, "Why wouldn't I mention her affair and divorce? Surely she didn't expect me to forget about it just because Richard is dead. She's not getting me back by default just because he's no longer around." Marcus was becoming upset at that assumption. William picked up the conversation. Elena suffered a severe head injury and nearly died. Part of her temporal lobe was physically damaged, and the swelling may have affected other areas. Her doctor explained that she's suffering from retrograde amnesia. "Amnesia? How can that be?" "She recognized me immediately. I assume she recognized both of you as well. It's not that she's lost all her memory. The problem is that she's lost almost everything from the past year and a half, as well as scattered memories from earlier periods. When she was admitted to the hospital, the doctors ran extensive tests and found she has significant gaps in her recent memories. She thinks you two just recently returned from South Padre Island." As William spoke, Marcus poured coffee into 3 cups, and William paused to take a sip. They believe that in time she may be able to recover many of the missing pieces, but they don't know when or how much will return. It's like she's living in the past. "So you're telling me she doesn't remember the divorce or even the affair? I suppose I could lie to her, but eventually, I'd have to tell her the truth. Like I said, she doesn't get a free pass just because Richard is dead." William was eager to continue. "We don't want to tell her lies. If we do, she might form memories that aren't real. The doctor explained that we need to tell her the truth so she can recover the memories that are still there. Her mind will fill in gaps where something is missing, and if we tell her something completely false, her mind might incorporate it as a false recovered memory. Marcus was confused. Then we're back where we started. You're saying I should have told her about the affair and divorce? Not exactly. The doctor's advice in situations like this is not to lie, just to be gradual with information. He wanted us to start giving her small pieces of information so she could put the puzzle together properly. You kind of overwhelmed her with information. The doctor thinks some of it may have triggered memories of the affair and divorce, but we don't know how much yet. Patricia regained her composure and said emotionally, "She's not very strong emotionally yet. The news you gave her has upset her tremendously. They're going to start her on additional medication, and hopefully, we'll be able to talk to her about everything again very soon." Throughout the conversation, Marcus felt somewhat ashamed of his approach. "I'm sorry if I made things worse. I didn't realize the situation she was in." "That's okay, Marcus. We hope you can help us with her recovery by helping to bring back some of her lost memories. We'd like to take any photo albums you have. As the doctors say, pictures can trigger memories that will help her reconnect with some of the lost ones. Anything else you might have that could help her remember would be appreciated too." At the mention of photo albums, Marcus stood up and walked to the kitchen sink, where he stood looking out the window. "I can't help you with the albums. They're not here anymore." Patricia looked puzzled. "What do you mean they're not here?" "I mean they're gone. They went out with my trash months ago." He turned and started walking down the hallway. "I can explain that if I show you an email." Marcus was gone for several minutes, during which Elena's parents comforted each other. When he returned, he had a printed email which he showed to the elderly couple. "A few months ago, I removed all the pictures I wanted to keep from our albums. A few days after that, I sent the following message to Elena's work email. I removed all the pictures I wanted from our albums. Any that were left, I put in a box so you can do the same. Let me know where you want them sent." He pointed to her response. "Do whatever you want with them. I'm not interested." I kept them for a few weeks after that, but finally decided that if she didn't want them and neither did I might as well throw them out. So that's what I did. "I'm sorry." William and Patricia's faces showed shock and dismay. They had nothing to say. After considering the situation, Marcus added, "There are a few other things I can give you besides this message. I'll go get them. It'll take about 15 minutes, so help yourselves to more coffee." Marcus went back to the computer room, and it was nearly 15 minutes before he returned. When he came back to the kitchen table, he was holding a stack of papers and a CD. "I printed out the entire collection of emails I used to discover the affair. Perhaps if Elena reads them, they'll bring back some of her memories on the subject." He placed the stack in front of Patricia, who reached out to take them and begin reading. Marcus immediately took them from her hands. "There are some very explicit passages in some of these emails. I'm not sure you should read them, considering the effect they had on me. But consider yourself warned if you decide to read them yourself." He added copies of all the legal documents that had been sent to him, including the warning letter after his visit to Henderson Associates. The last item was a CD he'd labeled South Padre. He handed it to them and said, "These pictures were on the computer, and they're all I have left of our time together. I should warn you about them as well. Elena and I visited a clothing-optional beach while we were there, and most of these pictures were taken there. In fact, there's only one picture of us fully dressed, sitting in beach chairs. Elena should probably look at the others privately." Elena's mother folded the papers and took the CD. Marcus thought it was a pitifully small collection to represent their entire marriage. He hoped it would help Elena somehow. They sat in silence for a few seconds before Patricia said, "I don't suppose you'd be willing to come talk to Elena about everything that happened between you two?" Marcus thought for a moment before replying, "I don't think so, at least not right now. If she wants to talk to me after she reads all of this and realizes what she did to our marriage, Give me a call and I might consider it. I suppose it's impossible for you to consider trying to start over with her? Her father asked with a hopeful look. I'm afraid I could never do that. I've spent all these months trying to get rid of my feelings for her, and I can't risk her turning around and doing all that to me again. She chose Richard's wealth and social position over me, and I can never give her the opportunity to do that to me a second time. Something in her character allowed her to do that, and I can't believe a head injury could have changed that aspect of her personality. Even if I could believe it was possible, I just wouldn't take the chance. William and Patricia agreed they understood his feelings but thanked him for offering to speak with Elena later if she wished. The three of them were walking out the front door, exchanging farewells, when Samantha and Emma appeared in the driveway. Emma immediately informed the older couple, "We're going to the zoo. We're going to see the elephants." The Hartwells were quick to greet mother and daughter and even quicker to leave, getting in their car and driving away. Apologizing for not being ready, Marcus invited Samantha and Emma inside to wait while he changed clothes. He was ready in just a couple of minutes, and the happy trio were soon on their way to the zoo. Another month passed, and Marcus was happier than he'd been in a long time. He was seeing Samantha and Emma at least twice a week, and their relationship was developing naturally. Emma had grown comfortable with Marcus's presence, though she still occasionally interrupted any romantic moments between the adults with perfect timing. Marcus and Samantha had managed to have a few evenings alone, thanks to Dorothy occasionally babysitting. Their relationship had progressed to a level of intimacy that satisfied both of them, though they were taking things slowly out of consideration for Emma's adjustment to having a man in their lives. One evening, as they were discussing their future, Samantha mentioned that her lease was up for renewal in 2 months. "I've been thinking about finding a place with a yard for Emma. These military benefits only go so far, but I've been saving what I can from my part-time work." Marcus had been thinking about the same issue. His house felt empty most of the time, and he genuinely enjoyed having Samantha and Emma around. "You know," he said carefully, "my place has a big backyard and there's plenty of room. Have you thought about maybe not renewing your lease?" Samantha looked at him seriously. "Marcus, are you asking us to move in with you?" "I guess I am. We've been spending so much time together anyway, and Emma loves the house. It would be good for all of us, I think." They talked about it extensively over the next few weeks, discussing everything from household responsibilities to Emma's schooling to their long-term expectations. Finally, they decided to try living together, with the understanding that if it didn't work out, Marcus would help Samantha find another apartment. The move went smoothly. Emma was thrilled to have her own big room and a backyard to play in. Marcus had moved his computer to a corner of the living room so Emma could have the spare bedroom. Dorothy helped with the transition, and even Thomas, Samantha's stepfather, pitched in with his truck. As they settled into their new routine, Marcus found himself happier than he'd been in years. Coming home to Samantha and Emma felt natural and right. Emma had started calling him Marcus instead of Mr. Thompson, which felt like progress, and Samantha seemed more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. 3 months after they'd moved in together, Samantha surprised Marcus with news that changed everything. "I went to the doctor today," she said one evening after Emma had gone to bed. Marcus looked up from the medical equipment manual he'd been reading. "Everything okay?" Samantha smiled. "More than okay. I'm pregnant." Marcus set down his book and stared at her. "Pregnant? Really? Really? About 6 weeks along, the doctor thinks." Marcus got up and pulled her into his arms. "How do you feel about it? Happy? Scared? Excited? All of the above?" She looked into his eyes. "How do you feel about it?" "I feel like we should get married," Marcus said, surprising himself with how quickly the words came out. Samantha laughed. "Is that a proposal?" "I guess it is. Not very romantic, but..." He got down on one knee right there in the living room. "Samantha Brooks, will you marry me? I love you. I love Emma, and I want us to be a real family." "Yes," she said, pulling him up to kiss her. Yes, I'll marry you. They decided on a simple ceremony at the small community church Samantha had been attending since Michael's death. Emma was thrilled to be the flower girl and even more excited about the prospect of becoming a big sister. The wedding was small but perfect. Dorothy and Thomas were there, along with a few of Marcus's co-workers and some of Samantha's friends from the neighborhood. Elena's family was notably absent, which was fine with Marcus. 6 months later, Marcus and Samantha welcomed twin boys, Michael Marcus Thompson and James David Thompson. Emma was an enthusiastic big sister, constantly wanting to help with the babies. Their house, which had once felt too big for just Marcus, now felt perfectly full with their family of 5. Marcus had never imagined he could be this happy, especially after everything that had happened with Elena. It was around this time that Marcus received an unexpected phone call from William Hartwell. Marcus, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I know it's been a while since we've spoken. Not at all, William. How are you and Patricia doing? How's Elena? There was a long pause. That's actually why I'm calling. Elena, she asked me to contact you. She's been living in Richard's old apartment, and her memory has been coming back gradually. She's read all those emails you gave us, and she remembers everything now. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. I see. She's been seeing a therapist and she's been working on, well, trying to make sense of what she did. She asked if she could write you a letter. She doesn't expect a response, and she's not asking to see you. She just wants to apologize properly. Marcus looked over at Samantha, who was feeding one of the twins while Emma helped with the other. His new life, his real life, was right here in this room. You can tell Elena that she can send a letter if she wants to. But William, I want you to understand something. I'm married now. I have a family. Whatever Elena needs to say, it can't change anything. I understand, Marcus. Thank you. The letter arrived 2 weeks later. It was lengthy and handwritten, covering many pages. Elena wrote about her recovery, her regrets, and her understanding of how much pain she'd caused. She didn't make excuses or ask for forgiveness. She simply acknowledged the truth of what she'd done and expressed her genuine remorse. At the end of the letter, she mentioned that she was using Richard's insurance settlement to establish a foundation that provided support services for families dealing with traumatic brain injuries. I can't undo what I did, she wrote, but maybe I can help other families stay together during the worst times of their lives. Marcus showed the letter to Samantha, who read it thoughtfully. She sounds like she's really changed, Samantha said. Maybe, Marcus replied, but it doesn't matter anymore. My life is here with you and the kids. And it was true. Over the next few years, Marcus rarely thought about Elena or their failed marriage. He was too busy with his growing family, his work, and the happiness he'd found with Samantha. Emma started school and excelled. The twins grew into active toddlers, and Marcus and Samantha talked about having another child. Their life together was everything Marcus had hoped for but never expected to find. 5 years after their wedding, Marcus received another call from William Hartwell. This time, the news was different. Marcus, I have to tell you, Elena passed away 3 days ago. Marcus felt a strange mix of sadness and closure. I'm sorry to hear that, William. What happened? She'd been having more health problems related to the brain injury, seizures, headaches. The doctors said it was related to the original trauma. She died peacefully in her sleep. After expressing his condolences and hanging up, Marcus sat quietly for a while. Samantha found him there and sat beside him. You okay? She asked. Yeah, Marcus said, and he meant it. I'm okay. A few months later, Marcus received a letter from an attorney. Elena had left him a substantial portion of her estate, nearly $500,000. The letter explained that Elena had specifically requested this bequest as a way to provide for the children she knew Marcus would raise well. Marcus and Samantha decided to use the money to establish education funds for all 3 children and to buy a larger house in a better school district. They also made a donation to Elena's Brain Injury Foundation, wanting to support the good work she'd been doing. Years later, when the children were older and asked about their family history, Marcus would tell them about Elena, not with bitterness, but as a cautionary tale about the importance of honesty, commitment, and making good choices. He would also tell them about second chances and the possibility of finding happiness even after experiencing profound disappointment. Emma, who grew up to become a teacher, would often say that Marcus was the best father she could have asked for. The twins, Michael and James, never knew a world where Marcus wasn't their dad. And Marcus, who had once thought his life was over, learned that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a much better one. As he watched his family grow and thrive, Marcus often reflected on how different his life might have been if Elena had never betrayed him. But those thoughts came without regret. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, with the people who truly belonged in his life. The pain of his first marriage had led him to a happiness he might never have found otherwise, and for that, he was genuinely grateful. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.